And now we welcome on an old friend of cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer. He works for DK Sports now, Tom Reed. Tom, how are you?
Good, Dan. Happy holidays and happy New Year to you.
Yep, back at you. Let's talk a little bit about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tom, this is a football team that really struggled in the month of December. I remember Mike Tomlin calling them junior varsity after they beat the Ravens and they lost to the Bengals. Then in the second half against the Colts, they come back, they win that game. Did that change anything for this team, or do you kind of see that as an outlier right now? Would you need to see more to say that the Steelers are kind of back?
Yeah, I would need to see more. It was a terrific second half comeback, and I think it does something for their confidence. I think it does something. It's weird to say about a 15 or 16-year veteran like Roethlisberger. I think it does something for his confidence. They were able to get back to driving the ball down the field, which they just have not been doing for the second half of the year. They had been kind of living on intermediate and short passes. The running game, again, when you ask me if I have confidence of that one half did anything, the running game still is a problem. I mean, midway through the third quarter of that game the other day, the rushing yardage total was 117-5. So they're struggling to run the ball. Their offensive line has kind of been banged up. Defensively, those issues are a little bit easier to identify because it's just been the injuries. With Devin Bush being out, I think he was lost in the Browns game, and then Bud Dupree. Those are two huge pieces that has been taken. They've had a couple other guys with some niggling injuries that have come back, but the offense has been a real question mark. They had drops with receivers. Tight end Eric Ebron had some drops. But yeah, I think the second half, they'll at least have some confidence going into the playoffs that, hey, against a fairly good team and a fairly good defense, which Indianapolis has, that they were able to really pull it back, because that would have been a disastrous way to come into this last game. And then you don't really have the opportunity. Well, I guess they would have backed into the division win because of other losses, the Browns lost, but still, that would have been a tough way to go into the playoffs with really struggling the way they did for 2.5 quarters the other night.
So, you mentioned running the football, and it's so interesting because James Conner, when you look at his splits, he has over 400 career yards against the Browns, and
Yeah.
really doesn't seem to run the ball effectively against anyone else. Do you expect that to change this week? Will the Browns finally figure out James Conner like the rest of the league?
Yeah, it is strange. He just seems like he could walk out of traction and play. He plays well against the Browns, and I'm sure he hopes. I would have to think he's one of the guys that has a good chance of playing. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's a strange question, but they have really struggled to run the ball this season. They started out pretty good. The first like 4 or 5 weeks, they had like 3 or 4 100-yard rushers or over 100 yards rushing in games. And just as the season wore on, they kind of just went away from it. I talked to Joe Thomas uh, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he says, I'm not at Steelers practices, but I'm telling you, they don't even work on it because it's not showing up in games. I mean, you don't spend your week working on stuff and not using it, and they just aren't running the ball well. It's an offensive line that is getting a bit older. And David DeCastro, I think, has been. I know he's going to the Pro Bowl, but he's been dinged up. Uh, you know, Al Villanueva has had kind of a rough finish to the season. Jukes Okafor has not been as good. Marquise Pouncey is still playing at a high level, but he's older. And so you combine all those little things, and you see some of the problems they have. For the most part of the season, it's just been a short dink and dunk game, which is really weird to watch the Steelers play that way. Because for most of his career, Roethlisberger has been the guy that stands in there like King Kong, like batting airplanes away, batting defenders away to get off the pass, take the extra seconds. I don't know where he ranks right now, but as of like a week or two ago, he led the league in the quickest passes. And then part of it was they just getting rid of it so quick. And the other end of that, and I'll be interested to see what the Browns. Now, again, you're not going to have Roethlisberger in this game, but if the Browns just get their hands up, because that's what teams have been doing against the Steelers, is the defensive linemen, batting balls down because they've been trying so many of these short intermediate passes.
Now, did you expect the Steelers to decide to rest Ben Roethlisberger? I was looking at it. The only case I really could have made to play him was if you wanted to maybe build off that momentum of the second half against the Colts. But obviously, Mike Tomlin thinking differently. So, are you surprised at all that it's going to be Mason Rudolph in this game?
No, not at all. I think coming right out of the game the other night, even though they didn't say that, the feeling was that he was not going to play. Again, the way the playoffs are structured this year, there is no bye for the second seed. So them and Buffalo fighting it out for the last week to see who gets the second seed really isn't as important. And then when you factor in the fact that home field advantage this year, if that second seed, I think, gets 2 home playoff games, I think. But the league overall is playing at like about 500 because there's no fans or very few fans. So I just think that the Steelers have looked at all of that information and said, you know what, it's not worth it. It's not worth risking guys.
Okay, so I guess I'll put you on the spot a little bit here. What do you expect to happen on Sunday?
I would expect the Browns to win. I would go with Vegas. I think they're 7 to 10 point favorites. I think what becomes interesting is if the Steelers are somehow able to get out to a lead. In watching a lot of the Browns games this year, they've been obviously really impressive for the most part, but they tend to struggle if they get a little bit behind in games. Now, the one exception, I thought they did a nice job against the Ravens coming back. That was a great game. Came back in that game, but we've seen them a couple times this year where they get behind in games. Obviously the Pittsburgh game, the first Baltimore game last week, obviously extenuating circumstances with the COVID guys. But, if the Browns get off to a good start, I expect them to kind of manage the game, being able to run the ball, having everybody back, all their weapons back for the most part. And they should be able to see that game out 7 to 10 point range.